They made its maintenance impossible. The result was a complex manual for existence. And so, here it is, my friends. A dense, exhausting, often absurd code of rules that govern the life of a 1950s housewife. From the pre-dawn transformation into a presentable human being, through meal planning with military precision and the deployment of a full arsenal of accessories, through constant cleaning and relentless social obligations, through telephone performances and culinary theater, through maintaining appearances, managing the mother-in-law, educating children, and competing quietly with the neighbors. Every single day was a performance without intermission, played before an audience that never stopped watching. These women were not simply running households. They were performing a complex social role with standards so demanding that meeting all of them at once was, in essence, impossible. And yet, failing to meet them carried consequences that made the attempt unavoidable. Acknowledging the scale of this role raises questions. Do we admire their resilience? Do we question the system that demanded so much? Or do we simply feel grateful that times have changed? We cannot deny that the 1950s housewife deserves recognition for the sheer magnitude of what her role required. The next time someone suggests that staying at home was easier, simpler, or less demanding than working outside of it, perhaps remember everything we have explored here today. The rules, the expectations, the constant performance, the invisible labor that made everything appear effortless while being anything but. This was work that required endless attention, emotional control, and physical endurance, all while leaving no visible proof of effort behind. Nothing could ever appear unfinished. Nothing could appear difficult. Nothing could reveal strain. The house had to remain immaculate. The children had to be well behaved. The meals had to arrive on time, warm, complete, and pleasing. The hostess had to smile. Even exhaustion needed to be hidden, folded neatly away like laundry, stored out of sight. To falter was to invite judgment. To rest was to risk accusation. To complain was to fail. And so the performance continued, day after day, without applause, without rest, without permission to stop. The audience was everywhere. Neighbors, family, friends, even strangers, watching, noticing, comparing. There was competition in the smallest details. Whose lawn was greener? Whose curtains were whiter? Whose children were quieter? Whose life appeared more effortless? Behind closed doors, there was no curtain call, no moment when the role could be set aside. The housewife of the 1950s existed within a system that demanded perfection and punished visibility of effort. She was expected to be tireless, cheerful, graceful, and endlessly capable. Her labor was real, but her exhaustion was not allowed to be. Her contribution was essential, but her struggle remained unnamed. This contradiction sat quietly at the center of daily life, unspoken but constantly felt. And still, every morning, the performance began again. Meeting all expectations at once was never truly possible. The standards contradicted one another. Be attentive, but never hovering. Be efficient, but never rushed. Be attractive, but never vain. Be devoted, but never dependent. There was no correct balance, only constant adjustment. Any misstep could be interpreted as failure. Any success was expected and therefore invisible. The role demanded absolute presence and total self-erasure at the same time. To be everything and yet be unseen. And still, not trying was not an option. The cost of non-compliance was social isolation, quiet disapproval, and the slow erosion of belonging. So the effort continued, not because it was achievable, but because it was required. Recognizing the scale of this labor invites reflection. Do we admire their endurance? Do we question the system that demanded so much while offering so little in return? Or do we simply feel relief that time has moved forward and that these expectations no longer define daily life in the same way? What cannot be denied is that the housewife of the 1950s deserves acknowledgement for the sheer magnitude of what her role required. This was not simplicity. This was not ease. This was not leisure. It was a full existence structured around constant vigilance, emotional regulation, and endless responsibility. So the next time someone suggests that staying at home was easier, simpler, or less demanding than working beyond it, remember everything we have explored together. The rules, the expectations, the performance without pause, the invisible labor that made everything appear effortless while being anything but. And on that note, my drowsy friends, it is time to let this chapter of history rest. Your pillow is calling. Your blankets are waiting. And tomorrow will bring its own demands, far less absurd than matching gloves to a hat just to walk to the post office. Thank you for spending this time exploring the past with me. Wherever you are in the world, whatever time your clock may show, I hope the dreams that find you tonight are sweet, restful, and free from any requirement to perform perfection for an audience of watchful neighbors. Sleep well, dear listeners. May your rest be as peaceful as the immaculate living rooms of the 1950s, and far more genuine. Good night, and sweet dreams. And now there is nothing left to analyze, nothing left to prove, nothing left to perform. The story can fade like a light gently dimmed. Breathing slows, the body becomes heavy, supported, safe. There is no audience here, no expectations, no standards to meet, only rest. The mind loosens its grip on comparison, on responsibility, on tomorrow. Thoughts drift, unstructured, unimportant, free to dissolve. You do not need to be perfect. You do not need to be productive. You do not need to be anything at all. Just present. Just resting. Just here. Let the weight of the day settle downward, away from the shoulders, away from the jaw, away from the hands. Each breath out softens something. Each pause creates more space. And in that space, sleep arrives quietly, without effort, without instruction. There is nothing left to hold, only the gentle pull of rest. Good night. Morning arrived long before it felt deserved. The housewife of the 1950s did not wake naturally. She woke on schedule. Even the act of waking was not truly her own. There was a correct time to rise, a correct sequence of movements, a correct pace at which the day was meant to begin. To linger was indulgent. To move too quickly was careless. The body was expected to cooperate quietly. Breakfast required preparation before anyone else appeared awake. Coffee brewed, bread toasted, tables cleared of yesterday before today had officially begun. Children would soon need attention. A husband would soon expect order. The house itself would soon need to present evidence that nothing had fallen behind. Every surface told a story. Every room carried expectation. The morning was not a fresh start. It was a continuation. As the day unfolded, it did not move forward in clear chapters. There was no sharp division between one task and the next. Everything blended. One action flowed into another without pause, without completion. A floor was cleaned, only to be walked on again. A meal was prepared, served, cleared away, and immediately replaced by the planning of the next. Laundry moved through its quiet cycle, soaking, washing, drying, folding. Each stage requiring attention, yet offering no sense of finality. Nothing stayed finished for long. The work did not accumulate. It dissolved. Hours passed quietly, marked not by clocks, but by needs. Someone was hungry. Something needed fixing. A sound from another room required response. The housewife remained alert to all of it. Her awareness stretched outward, constantly monitoring, constantly adjusting. The day had no center, only edges. The body carried this rhythm even when the mind drifted. Muscles learned the movements through repetition. Hands folded fabric almost automatically. Feet traced familiar paths from room to room, kitchen to hallway, hallway to bedroom, and back again. Fatigue did not arrive suddenly. It accumulated quietly. A heaviness behind the eyes, a slight slowing of movement, a pause that lasted just a moment longer than intended. Rest was rarely complete. It came in fragments. A brief moment at the table, a few minutes near a window, a pause while water boiled or bread browned. These moments were not claimed, they were borrowed. The body adapted, learning to function within narrow margins of recovery. And still it continued. Evening did not signal an ending. It simply altered the tone. The pace softened, but the responsibility remained. Dinner required attention. Children required guidance. Conversation required energy. The appearance of calm became increasingly important. Fatigue needed to be hidden behind routine. Voices were kept steady, movements measured. The house shifted into its nighttime version, still observed, still evaluated. Only later, when lights dimmed and footsteps slowed, did the edges begin to loosen. Even then, the mind remained active. Tomorrow hovered close. Night finally arrived, not as an event, but as a gradual easing. The house did not fall silent all at once. It quieted in layers. Doors closed, lights dimmed, voices softened. The final tasks of the day were performed slowly, with less urgency, but no less care. Dishes were washed one last time. Surfaces were wiped. Chairs returned to their places. These actions were familiar, almost comforting in their repetition. They marked the approach of rest, even if rest itself remained uncertain. When the house was finally still, the housewife moved carefully, as though not to disturb the fragile calm. Each step was lighter, each sound more noticeable. The day receded, but did not disappear. In the quiet of late night, the internal world became louder. Thoughts surfaced that had been postponed all day. Small worries, unfinished considerations, moments replayed. There was no longer an audience, yet habits of self-monitoring remained. Even alone, the role lingered. The body rested, but the mind remained alert, slow to release its grip. Sleep approached gradually, hesitant, unforced. It arrived not as collapse, but as permission. Permission to loosen, permission to drift. And when sleep finally came, it carried with it the promise of repetition. Morning would return. The rhythm would resume. Sleep did not erase the day. It softened it. Memories lost their sharp edges. Tasks blurred into one another, no longer demanding sequence or completion. The body rested, but lightly, as though prepared to wake at any signal. Even in sleep, attention remained nearby. A distant sound, a shift of air, the quiet knowledge that morning would come whether one was ready or not. Dreams moved slowly, without urgency. They carried familiar rooms, familiar movements, familiar repetitions. There was no need to hurry here. Time expanded, stretching gently, allowing the mind to drift without direction. In this suspended space, the boundaries between days softened. Yesterday and tomorrow lost their distinction. There was only rhythm, breathing in, breathing out. The steady pattern that underpinned everything else. The house existed without demand. Rooms waited patiently. Surfaces held no expectation. For a brief while, nothing needed to be maintained. Nothing needed to be corrected. Existence required no performance. This was the quiet that rarely received acknowledgement, but quietly sustained everything else. Eventually, the night began to thin. Not suddenly, but subtly. The darkness lightened at its edges. The stillness became less complete. Morning approached, as it always did, not as interruption, but as continuation. The cycle prepared to begin again. Yet for now there was still space. Stillness lingered. Breath remained slow. The body remained heavy. Nothing yet demanded attention. And in this final stretch of night, we allow the story to loosen its structure. There is no need to move forward, no need to reach an ending. The rhythm continues on its own, gentle and repeating, breathing, resting, drifting. The past settles quietly, the present softens. Sleep deepens without effort. The story remains, but no longer asks to be followed. It is simply there. The house rested in its familiar shape. Walls held warmth. Floors remembered footsteps. Furniture remained exactly where it was left, patient and unmoving. Nothing asked to be improved. Nothing demanded adjustment. In the quiet hours, the home became less a stage and more a container, a place where movement paused and intention softened. The air itself felt heavier, slower, as if encouraging stillness. Breathing followed its lead. The house rested in its familiar shape. Walls held warmth. Floors remembered footsteps. Furniture remained exactly where it was left, patient and unmoving. Nothing asked to be improved. Nothing demanded adjustment. In the quiet hours, the home became less a stage and more a container, a place where movement paused and intention softened. The air itself felt heavier, slower, as if encouraging stillness. Breathing followed its lead. Time moved differently now. Minutes were no longer measured. Hours lost their urgency. There was no schedule to follow, no sequence to maintain, only the steady continuation of rest. Thoughts appeared and drifted away without consequence. They no longer needed to be resolved. Awareness narrowed, settling gently into the body. The sensation of fabric, the weight of limbs, the quiet rise and fall of breath. Nothing else required attention. Somewhere in this stillness, the idea of responsibility grew faint, not erased, but distant, as if seen through a window rather than carried directly. The habits of vigilance relaxed their hold. There was no one watching here, no one waiting. The body responded naturally, releasing tension layer by layer. shoulders softened, hands loosened, the jaw unclenched. Rest deepened without instruction. The rhythm repeated, breath in, breath out, again and again. Each repetition felt familiar, reassuring. Nothing needed to change. The night held its shape, wide and unhurried. Sleep settled more fully now, not pulling downward, but spreading outward, like warmth slowly filling a room. The story no longer advanced. It circled gently, returning to the same quiet points. Stillness, wait, ease. There was no need to listen closely. The words existed only as background, a soft presence rather than a guide. Awareness drifted freely between sound and silence, between thought and rest. Nothing was required of either one. And so the night continued, uninterrupted, unmeasured. The cycle remained intact, steady and calm, rest supporting rest. There was no urgency to wake, no need to prepare. Only this moment, extended gently, allowed to last. The night held steady. No changes announced themselves. No shifts required attention. The quiet was complete enough to feel protective, a kind of shelter made of stillness. Breathing remained slow, unforced. Each breath felt supported by the silence around it. The body rested in the exact position it had chosen. There was no impulse to move, no signal demanding adjustment. Muscles softened further, as though gently dissolving into the surface beneath them. Weight settled evenly. Nothing pulled, nothing pressed. Comfort arrived quietly and stayed. Thoughts appeared less frequently now. When they did, they moved without urgency. A memory, a fragment, a vague image. None of them asked to be followed. They drifted past, leaving no trace. The mind learned that it did not need to stay alert. Time thinned. Moments stretched without direction. There was no before and no after. Only this extended pause, gentle and continuous. Awareness floated lightly, no longer anchored to tasks or outcomes. The night remained open. The words themselves began to matter less. Their sound softened, blending into the quiet. Meaning loosened, cadence remained, a steady, even rhythm that required no attention. Listening became optional, rest deepened regardless, and still nothing changed. The stillness held, breathing continued. The body remained heavy, supported, at ease. There was no end approaching, only continuation.